This is the online event, and we always try to have some informative topics which are hot for the moment. And we have two of our very interesting professors here. We have Professor Weil, who is a professor in geopolitics at Antwerp Management School, and also gives occasionally some guest lectures at our master. And we have Professor Verhoeven here, who most of you know probably as the maritime professor, focusing mainly on port economics. What they're going to do today is they're going to talk about geopolitics, a very, very, very hot issue. If you see what's going on for the moment, not only with Trump, but also with China, Israel, you also have Taiwan and China. So it's very, very hot, and Steffi will definitely talk a bit more about that. And then Patrick will focus on the second part on what's the impact now on the supply chain. We leave enough time for questions, and of course, after the two presentations, after questions, we definitely leave still some time, 10, 15 minutes, to have a chat and to hear the latest news from all the alumni here. So thanks for joining. I'm very, very happy that you're all here. And without further ado, I'd like to pass the floor to Steffi. Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much, Wouter. Hold on, let me share my slides first. So here you go. Hope you can all see it. I will do it in the right.
Yeah, we can see it very, very clearly.
Okay. Yeah. So once again, thank you very much for the invitation. And I have to admit, I was very excited. And at the same time, I was like, oh, how am I going to manage, to give you an overview of geopolitics in 20 minutes? So I decided to make a choice. I will touch upon a couple of issues, but I see it would be cool to come back and to talk for 1.5 hours. Maybe we can do this at another time. So geopolitics. What is geopolitics? Geopolitics is actually a term that is very broadly defined, and we could have a whole lecture on this. But maybe for you, we talk about the relationship between power. So who is holding power? And the concept of space. And space is actually defined often, with the state and with borders and with maps. And then you can say, what does this have to do, with transport, with supply chains? And I hope I can give you some understanding of this. I'm, also specialized in China. So I looked at investments, of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. This is an initiative where China really, really tried, to increase infrastructure. I mean, did China try only to increase infrastructure or to gain more space and power? And I will also talk about Taiwan a little bit in this context. But let me take you on the journey. And I felt like I have to explain a little bit more to you. If you talk about power, you also talk about states. I mean, this is now a political perspective. And we talk about sovereignty. Sovereignty means, that only, the state has the power, the authority to govern itself. This is especially something, that is important if you think about, the current crisis situation, because sovereignty is a very nice concept, but then you think about, and yesterday actually I was doubting if I should mention Trump, but if you think about, the Ukraine war, there I think you understand what sovereignty means, and that no other state, no other leader should have the power, to invade another country, and this is one of the main, or one of the most important issues also in geopolitics. And this is clear. But then, and I mentioned Trump, and I wanted to discuss this a little bit with you. You say, okay, you have the state, and the state actor is holding all of this power. But if you look at supply chains, or if you look at companies, and especially if the companies are supported by political leaders, who shouldn't do this, what is going to happen? If these kind of actors, and not states, but company, suddenly hold so much power, what does that do, with our global system? So sovereignty, well defined, but it does lead to violence. And then especially if you think about, the state is defined by borders. These borders have to be protected. And then you will understand a little bit later when I also talk about Taiwan and other actors than the state. how are we going to deal with this? This is all parts of geopolitics. And then I thought, I came back to the US. I know it's a hot topic, and I was actually also thinking for a long, long time which issues I should mention, and also which issues are actually already, where we can already do some research on this, that are academically solid. But if we think about some of the US politics, we definitely can make statements on, how borders are protected and how violent this can get if you think about, human rights issues. So what are contemporary geopolitical tensions? And, if you prepare a lecture on geopolitical tensions, you can actually change that every day. You have some, some tensions where you say, this has a long, long history. You look at the Suez Canal, and you're all, I think, experts more than I in transport. There you see, this route has been contested for a long, long time. And suddenly we see, that there are also US-China strategic competitions. This is really about, lines and, who is holding the power on transport. And there again, I come back to Chinese investments, not only in the Suez Canal, but all over. What is actually going to happen if another actor like China, but also in the name of companies, is investing in this? There you have geopolitical tensions, and you see this, all over the world. You also have security threats. If you talk about, and I will define this a little bit more, any actor that is a non-state actor, you have companies, and they can be managed a little bit or not. But you also have terrorist groups like the Houthis. This is also something, also in transport and in supply chain, this has to be managed. And then actually I put it in last minute because I was like, should I mention tariffs? But I was like, yes, of course. It's a hot topic as well, to, protect your trade, to protect, your nation state, your economics. And I think Patrick can say more about this. Tariffs are actually a vehicle you can use. It's been a vehicle that has been used in the 70s and that led to many, many crises, protectionism. We were hoping and thinking that we were actually beyond this, that you actually don't do politics with tariffs. But what you see right now, and luckily, I think it was yesterday or the day before, that China and the US lowered the tariffs. But this is actually, this tariff politics does have, a big impact also on supply chains and on our trade. But we could have a whole lecture on this. I just wanted to bring some awareness to this. And I am actually very much interested, and I hope I can light the fire with you as well. Like in the future, if you think about geopolitics, in this political game, and especially now, what you see, what's going on, these kind of non-state actors, companies, interest groups, industry associations. I mean, it's like any kind. I'm also interested in your opinion on this. Any kind of companies, NGOs, ports do have so much power, have gained so much power that there are actually shifts in the international system, what we call the global governance system. And even now, and this is, I'm also, I did a lot of research on lobbying and on narrative building, especially now, and with the US, with President Trump, who is giving so much power, and this is very, very unusual, to tech giants. I mean, these people are suddenly, interfering in a concept they shouldn't interfere, as you see. I mean, you have seen that. You don't have, they said in the past, in the first Trump administration, you have adults in the room. That means you had advisors that kind of hold him back, not to do politics that can also interfere or that can disrupt the international system, international trade, supply chains, whatever. Now we are in a situation where you don't have any adults in the room. So what does that do with us? And this concept of what kind of power and how much power should these non-adults of companies have? And there maybe you also see a slight left-minded perspective to it. Should a company have so much power that they can actually influence politics that are related to supply chains? So you have to maybe switch your mind a little bit or turn the perspective. I really look at supply chains and transport from a perspective of geopolitics or politics. So how much power should you actually give to these kind of non-state actors? And then we did a big study. Actually, we did a couple of studies. We did one study for the European Union, and we just recently also looked at, because we were so fascinated by that we said, okay, you have politics, you have the state, and you have supply chains, and you have certain sectors where supply chains are very, very important. So we looked at the supply chain on semiconductors, and Taiwan is really the leader in these kind of in the chain. So but you say Taiwan, everybody says yeah, but actually it's not Taiwan. It's companies that hold, power in these supply chains. So we started to say, these kind of, technical and trade are actually new strategic battlegrounds. Also very interesting conversations also with Roel Gevers about this. He said, yeah, but if they hold so much power, what's actually going on? So we looked into that. We worked on that paper a long time, and we saw that Taiwan is also doing some kind of chip diplomacy and is playing and steering, global supply chains with that. But if you then think about this, because it's very important. The semiconductors, how much responsibility should actually lie, with these companies? And there is, hold on, it's on the next slide. This is also something that keeps on being repeated, that you say, because Taiwanese companies hold such an important, are so important in these global tech supply chains. This will actually also shield Taiwan from any military aggression, because this sector is so important that maybe the People's Republic of China or any other actor wouldn't dare to start a war with Taiwan. And this whole topic, and there we are back to the broader topic on geopolitics. I know I'm going very quickly. I would love to have more time for this. It's also very hot, especially with the invasion of Ukraine and with the politics Trump is doing, kind of, saying, Zelensky shouldn't have started the war. The whole issue of Taiwan is very hot. And then make a link to you, where you are experts to the supply chain. Is this what they call the silicon shield argument? Is this really holding ground? Because if you think about this, then you could say supply chains are actually, the better deterrence than, buying warfare. I hope you can you kind of understand. But we looked at that, we collected data, and unfortunately not yet, and it also shouldn't be like this, supply chains and companies don't have the power to deter war. So it's not helping for security. But what is helping? You look at semiconductors, you look at the supply chain, and you also look at other actors that are investing. So, and I was in the beginning, I was mentioning, the Belt and Road Initiative, and there we see, China is investing and is investing in ports, in railways, and there was a huge discussion on this, saying, is this sustainable, or what are we doing here? Is this contributing to peace? So because this is what China is claiming. So I quoted all the speeches, and they keep on repeating, if you say, okay, I invest in infrastructure, this will eventually lead to peace. I mean, I cannot make bold statements about this, but what I've seen, these kind of infrastructure investments, they lead to increasing power of China. So we are back to the concept of power in space and geopolitics. Yes, investment into infrastructure gives a nation state a lot of power. And they're also using it for the diplomacy. So this is kind of the counterexample of what's going on, in terms of the supply chain. With all this discussion, suddenly, let me bring this in, I want to mention it, the EU, and that was the moment when the EU came to us. We were like a group of 3 researchers who said, but what is going on here and what can we do? It's like, what should we do now? Should we interfere in these kind of power politics and infrastructure investments? And can you give us some advice? And how can we actually come to an agreement also with Taiwan, because officially we cannot really do that. So we looked at the EU Gateway. I don't know if you heard about this. I think if you're expert in the field, maybe. The EU launched an initiative, also a little bit like the Belt and Road, just from the EU perspective, to also invest in infrastructure and to gain some grounds, on, I would say, with the power game, that they can also face China. Unfortunately, until now, I mean, we are not finished, with the analysis of the outcome of the EU Gateway. But if I see what's going on with the Belt and Road in China, I would say it's not quite working. It's working for infrastructure development, but it's not quite working to gain some more geopolitical power on this. Yeah, I'm almost finished, Thomas. I see you're getting a little bit. What did I want to say with this? Also, supply chains, and also for you, maybe if you have a business perspective to this, supply chains are part of the geopolitical game. They're not neutral. Also, the actors in the supply chain are not neutral actors. So maybe keep this in mind. Maybe agreements between the actors would give some momentum to gain power together. But unfortunately, we are not in times where we sign agreements and we gain in the global political system, we gain power together. Well, I mean, it's like if I look at the US is very much pushing, to be the hegemon and actually to do what they like. But it would be very important to have, some agreements also for corporate actors. But because, these supply chains, and that makes it very interesting for international politics, the supply chains go all over the world. But, the actors are still in the nation state. So how can you actually, make agreements that also limit the actors or the companies in different states? This is not easy. I mean, it gives you food for thought for the next 10 years. Well, at least for me. So let me conclude my little discussion here. So what did I want to tell you? Geopolitics is all over. It's omnipresent. It shapes power relations, dynamics, global structures, and it's definitely also important in terms of maritime and transport. Sovereignty, something that was a concept that was very much agreed on, where we said, this is our concept for peace. This is, we are not allowed to invade other states. This is something that is challenged by state invasions, but also by non-state actors. Challenged, or, it's not that black and white, because they reshape and they have a lot of influence. And this is also enabled through global supply chains. All of this is and it's been before, it's not only with Trump. Trade and infrastructure is very strategic and it's very political. We have seen that, there are thousands of examples now. I use 2, the semiconductor, the Belt and Road, the Gateway. It's to gain power, definitely. And I think this is why supply chains are actually at the front lines of geopolitics. And this is why I'm very excited that you invited me, and that I hope I can have more exchange with all of you on this topic. Okay, I stop here.
Thank you very much, Steffi. Then
My pleasure.
I think we probably have some questions, but we wanted to keep them maybe rather at the end to have a combined, indeed, discussion about this. So thank you so much. I suggest that we move on with Patrick's part.
Yep, I will also share the screen. Oh, I had it and now it's gone. Can you see it?
Yes, we do. Not
Yes.
yet in presenter mode. But
No, it's funny that I can't see it. I don't know what I've done. I'm gonna try again, sorry. There we are. Now you should see it in full screen.
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you, and thank you, Steffi, for that great presentation. Thomas asked me, this is some months ago, I think, when whether I wanted to talk about this issue, and of course I never can refuse anything to Thomas, so I said yes, with pleasure. Until I sat down this week to start preparing that, I said, oh my God, where am I going to start? Because there is so much to cover. And it's like a moving target. I mean, it changes almost every day, basically, what's happening in terms of the world that is relevant for the maritime industry. So what I thought I'd do is I will take a step back first and sort of take a more historical perspective on geopolitics and shipping and ports in particular. And then I will single out three issues that I thought are probably the most topical at the moment, which is the US policy for trade and shipping, energy and food security, cyber, and then I will end with a few points about how, especially port industry, can work on resilience, dealing with, unexpected factors. But let me start with the most famous political cartoon in history, which is the one here to your left, where you see William Pitt the Younger, the Prime Minister of the Great Britain at the time, and Napoleon in 1805. Carving up the world, the plum pudding in danger, during the Napoleonic Wars. It's a cartoon that has been cited and quoted and copied so many times up to the present day, because I found a variation on it from 2025, where you see three other leaders of the world doing exactly the same thing. So you could say that maybe we've come full circle when we look at imperialism and people trying to divide their sphere of power when it comes to the globe. And of course, shipping and ports are in the middle of that. The fact that almost 90% of global trade moves by sea means inevitably that ports and shipping industry are in the middle of these geopolitical tensions. And just to take a long perspective back, all based on the port where you all graduated, or the city where you all graduated, the city of Antwerp, has been at the forefront of geopolitics for centuries. Here is a picture of the 16th century, the siege of Antwerp, which led to the fall of Antwerp, and as you probably know, also to the closure of the River Scheldt for almost 2 centuries, so cutting off the port from its vital access. We had to wait until the French came and Napoleon came and said, well, I like this port, we should develop this. He opened the river again, but he had definitely not really commercial aspirations with the port of Antwerp. He had military aspirations, and our first docks that he had built served his war against England in principle. Moving on, Belgium became independent. The Dutch didn't like that, so they blocked the Scheldt again, or at least they were levying a toll on traffic on the river. And that was abolished in 1863 by an international treaty where 26 countries came together to pay a one-time lump sum to the Dutch government so that they would abolish the toll. All countries that believed in trade, but of course also had geopolitical reasons why they wanted to keep the port of Antwerp open to traffic. And in our century, one of the most famous, although perhaps less documented battles during the Second World War was in the autumn of 1944, the Battle of the Scheldt, which is really meant to make sure that the Allied troops would have access to the port of Antwerp again to develop their supply chains and supplies and military armory to pursue the war further down in Germany. Just a few snapshots of history to say that seaports have been at the heart of geopolitics forever. I found this a very nice summary from a recent paper by Theo Nottebohm and Hercules Haralambidis, basically, which lists the various aspects when we talk about geopolitics and shipping. It's of course about trade, but it's also about who owns critical infrastructure, and Steffi referred to that also, Belt and Road and investments of foreign powers in ports and terminals is very topical as well. Maritime choke points, the Red Sea and Suez is obvious one, but we've got others. We've got Panama, we got the Strait of Malacca, there's a few others there. And then, unfortunately, what happens also in our times now are direct attacks on ports, whether they're physical or whether they are digital. This is an interesting barometer that our colleagues at the International Shipping Association or International Chamber of Shipping publish. They started doing this during the pandemic. And you can see how only in a couple of years, political instability has come to be the number one perceived risk to maritime operations. In 21, 22, of course, epidemics were the number one, but there was no sign yet of political instability, and that has rapidly moved to the front of the risks that the maritime industry sees. And if you compare the level of risk and the confidence that the industry has that they can do something about it, then of course political instability scores very low on that confidence and very high on that risk compared to other risk factors. So that's a bit of quick background as to, you know, what does it mean for our industry. If we can go to the White House and to Liberation Day, which is actually only 6-7 weeks ago, if you see what happened in those 6-7 weeks, well, it's amazing how we've seen, first of all, these incredible high tariffs being proposed. Then there was a pause. There has been a trade deal with the United Kingdom. And as Steffi mentioned, only a few days ago, there was a détente, at least in the relationship with China, when it comes to these tariffs. But that's only one part of the story, really. And well, this slide is actually outdated because that's the one that was put by Xeneta, which is a think tank for shipping and aviation. Just after these tariffs were announced, they asked cargo owners, what are your next plans? And you see here the mixed picture. But this was beginning of April. Meanwhile, the situation is again different. And as I said, it's not the only measure. There are others affecting maritime. This is the proposal of the United States Trade Representative when it comes to ships that were built or are built in China. Initially, also very draconian tariffs that were introduced, and no matter who operates those ships or who owns them. We see a similar pattern as with the tariffs. They've been watered down. This is, as far as I know, the current proposal that would come into effect as from October this year. If you read the trade press, people say that it's still stupid to do this, but in the end, it's probably a little bit more workable, certainly more workable than what was on the table before. But what is also important to remember is that this was initiated before President Trump took office. This was already something that was discussed with the Biden administration under impulse of the trade unions. And this is another initiative that hasn't got too much publicity yet, but it's an ongoing investigation of the Federal Maritime Commission in the US into maritime choke points. So they've listed 7 maritime choke points. Actually, the map is not from FMC, it's just a map that I included to introduce the most common maritime choke points in the world, but they're focusing on 7. And they've just concluded an investigation and a deadline, or let's say a process for that people can comment to see what sort of regulations, policies, and other things are applicable to these choke points that may be a threat to US security or may be a threat to trade. What the consequence of this will be, I don't know. I think it's too soon to say because they closed the call for contributions only 2 days ago. And then, of course, no surprise that some actors start reacting. Hutchison Ports Holdings from Hong Kong decided to sell its assets in Panama, together with some other assets. Was that a preemptive strike? Did they want to be ahead of being ousted in some way or another? We don't know. Fact is that they got criticism themselves from the Chinese government for doing this. The jury is still out also because the deal they said they sold the assets to BlackRock still needs to be approved by various competition authorities. So we don't know whether it will in the end exactly happen. But still, was that a preemptive strike? We don't know. But there is that broader picture, and this goes beyond Donald Trump. I think this is something that lives very much in the United States. Is we want to become a maritime nation again. We want to promote shipbuilding. And on the 30th of April, when this picture was taken, there was a reintroduction of the U.S. Ships Act. Again, something that was already proposed or discussed under the Biden administration. It's a bipartisan proposal, which really is there to promote U.S. shipbuilding through a number of measures, some of them which are protectionist and some of them which are probably even worse than what the U.S. Trade Representative Initiative had in mind. And again, what is industry doing? Hedging the bets, trying to curry favor. The gentleman on the picture, the one on the right, I'm sure you know him, but the one in the middle is Rodolfo Sade, is the CEO of CMA CGM, French container line, who went to the White House some weeks or months ago, and he pledged to invest $20 billion in the United States maritime industry over the next few years to revive the U.S. maritime sector. And he notably pledged to build container ships of its subsidiarity APL in the United States. Whether that's going to happen or not, it's all a bit in the air. But you see this picture, I found it very telling. It's even that map of Gulf of America is there in the background. And you see the top man of a European shipping company making that pledge in the White House. Energy and food security, I'm going to connect this to the whole discussion about decarbonization, but let's not forget that that is also a very geopolitical discussion in the end. And if we want to meet targets for like the Paris Climate Agreement, but also the targets for shipping, we will have to invest tremendously in infrastructure, energy infrastructure for renewable fuels. That's where the concept of the clean energy marine hubs come from, which is the idea that you will need to develop a connected network of ports where new energy supply chains can be developed, because they will not be the same as the fossil fuels. You need different networks. You need that transportation from places where you have a lot of wind and solar energy, where they can be produced and then can be distributed to parts of the world where you need them. It's a governmental initiative, which is interesting to know, or an intergovernmental initiative from the Clean Energy Ministerial. And you see some of the governments there that have pledged support for this. And there's some quite important ones there. China is there, Brazil is there, the United Arab Emirates are there. Of course, all countries with huge stakes in the energy sector. And it is supported by the International Chamber of Shipping and ourselves, IAPH, to move this forward. But again, for that to succeed, you need security, you need secure trade lanes. And we've seen what happened to tankers and other vessels in the Red Sea. That situation seems to be a little bit more under control at the moment, but I don't think we've seen immediately already a big return of shipping to the Suez Canal. If you want to have a map like this operational to meet, let's say, the global decarbonization targets, you would not only need to invest in that infrastructure and that supply chain, but you have to make sure that it is also secure and can function. And the same goes for food security. The impact of the war in Ukraine is clear. Ukraine is one of the grain barns of the world, a major exporter. And when that initial Black Sea Grain Initiative was introduced with support of the United Nations, you can see how far these exports from Ukraine actually reach, to which destinations that cargo goes. Russia gave up on that corridor. Ukraine continued on their own to provide exports, but of course they've been target of attacks. Most recently, even in March, an attack by Russia on the port of Odessa. A reminder that Russia does have that ability to disrupt shipping in the Black Sea and therefore affect also food security. And this vintage World War II poster also illustrates a little bit what is probably missing. At that time, you had the great naval powers, Britain, United States, and others who really cared about freedom of navigation and protecting international trade, military-wise, if necessary. And today we don't know whether these powers, A, have the capacity. Britain is no longer the Britain of 1941, or the political will, in the case of the United States, to act as sort of the naval policeman to make sure that free trade and free navigation can be guaranteed everywhere. I'm jumping from one to the other, but the idea was to give a bit of a snapshot. And I think probably apart from political instability, we saw in that initial map that cyber risk is probably the number one risk in the maritime sector today. And this is a graph that shows you the number of cybersecurity incidents. They've really skyrocketed from 2020 onwards. Pandemic had something to do with that as well. And this is an overview, slightly outdated. So 2023 sees a number of major attacks on ports and also the types. And you see that cyber warfare is there, cyber as a part of the hybrid warfare. That is, of course, very relevant to ports as critical infrastructure who are extremely vulnerable to these attacks. I mean, it's very easy to stop operations or block a port if you get access to the central nerve system. A port that has a lot of experience with that is the port of LA. And they used to have 7 million attacks per month in 2014, which is already enormous. So 7 million attempts to get into the system, and that increased to 60 million attacks in 2023, which is an enormous increase. They're one of the ports that have invested also in cybersecurity operations and in the Cyber Resilience Center, where they not only look at the Port Authority itself, but they also look at operations of the wider port community, which functions as a kind of early warning system for the entire business community, and of course also in close cooperation with the authorities. We're all very, or maybe not all, enthusiastic about new technologies, and also the port sector and the shipping industry is taking part in that. This is a preview of a report that we're going to produce next week, which will include an overview of how are ports adopting emerging technologies like AI or drones or quantum computing. But each of these technologies bring their own risks when it comes to cyber. And that's something we've been working on concretely as IPH, again, something which will be published in a couple of weeks, specific guidelines for the port sector on how to deal with these emerging technologies and their cyber-related risks. And that brings me to the final part, is to see, how can the port sector, maritime industry build its resilience, knowing that, of course, a lot of these geopolitical factors are beyond the direct control of ports. So you're dealing with the unexpected. You're dealing with factors that can be economic in nature, they can be environmental, they can be political, which potentially all can have the result that your port might be disrupted, or worst case might even have to close. So how do you deal with that? It's not that there is one, ideal solution, but if you look at the different levels where we look at resilience, we look at policy, including politics, we look at the economics, and we look at operations, there is one actor that comes and connects these three layers. That's the Port Authority. And the document or the slides that you see here, they come from a set of guidelines that we've developed internally for our members, which are predominantly port authorities, on how they can work in identifying the various factors that can lead to these unexpected events, can anticipate as far as that is possible, how can they cope with them, and how can they adapt and also learn from that and increase their resilience. We've developed them also more specific for cyber, and we are currently actually working on specific guidelines also for the impact of climate change. And we're starting the discussion also on warfare and how we can protect physically and digitally infrastructure going forward. And that brings me to the conclusion, the role of a trade association like ours. We were founded in a very interesting time after the Second World War. Ports in Japan and the US, especially the West Coast, wanted to trade again. This was the time when the motto "World Peace through World Trade" was very popular after the war. Our founding fathers added the sentence "World Trade through World Ports," and that's how we were founded back in 1955, now 70 years ago. This is the current overview of the countries that are represented in IPH, and it's slightly out of date because 2 weeks ago Thailand joined as well, and they're not on the map here yet. But you can see it's quite diverse. There are countries there who are perhaps currently not the best friends with each other. We don't have Russia, by the way. We never had Russia as a member. But we have others which might live in a sphere of tension. And a lot of our members are, of course, government-owned, state-owned, or city-owned. So that is not always easy, but we do try through our conference, which will this year be in Japan, try to get the dialogue going between at least the port stakeholders on how we can still do business and prosper in those difficult times. Thomas, you will allow me this slight commercial pitch here. But there is also a free webinar next week, which you can join, and you will see some well-known faces in the academic world, Theo Notteboom, Thanos Palis, who will present our first annual State of the Ports Industry report, which is based on a membership survey next week, Friday, and that is free of charge. So with that small publicity stunt, I would like to conclude and thank you very much for your time.